I think at the core of it, the mission is how do we build the best digital destination for sports fans to catch up on all the sports they love.
You've got the situation where the creator's now basically acting as a broadcaster and saying, I'm going to buy the rights myself and use YouTube as my distribution platform.
You think about energy and passion and speaking to the audience in a different way, which was so successful and broke all the records for the biggest live streams we've had on the platform.
Rights have become incredibly fragmented. They're being sold to 5 or 6 different buyers instead of 1 or 2.
It's been about underrepresented communities finding a voice and finding a home on YouTube, whatever their community is.
Hello and welcome to the Sports Pundit podcast, the show exclusively for the people shaping the future of sport. Driven by my curiosity working within the industry, I started this show to host conversations with decision makers from the MLB to the ICC, unpacking their strategies and industry shaping ideas. In today's episode of the Sports Pundit podcast, I'm joined by Rob Pilgrim, Head of Sport and Primetime at YouTube EMEA. Rob has spent the last 8 years leading YouTube's end-to-end sports business across the region, from commercial deals and product launches to strategy and societal impact. He's helped build a team that's landed global rights deals, launched paid products like Primetime Channels, and championed the platform's role in accelerating the growth of women's sport. In this conversation, we explore what that future looks like through the lens of YouTube CEO Neal Mohan's 4 big bets: AI, creators as studios, the living room, and protecting the creator economy. If you care about how sport is being reshaped by platforms and creators, this one is a must listen. So without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Rob Pilgrim. Obviously, you spent a long time at Google, not necessarily entirely with YouTube. Where I would love to begin the conversation is just to get a little bit of a background on your own personal journey.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. Great to make it on. So, in terms of background, I'm now 14 years at Google as a broader company. I'd always had a passion for sport, and I knew I wanted to work in the industry, but finding a path there wasn't always easy. And it's not like at that time Google had some kind of giant sports team that made it a very obvious fit for what I wanted to do. But I was always really interested in the intersect of technology and sport, the intersect of kind of storytelling in sport and how that's evolving. And so those were things that I felt intuitively growing up could be done in a better way. I didn't anticipate it would necessarily be with Google and YouTube, but here we are. So my journey was, I was in the Google sales team originally. I think the thing that really built me in the sports world and educated me a lot, and I had a real privilege to be a part of, was Adidas's World Cup campaign in 2014. And so we had what was a groundbreaking partnership at the time for Adidas to build a presence on YouTube and then to pilot some really cool, innovative, forward-thinking things in the ad space, which I think remain innovative today. And so a huge part of that we built together, and it was very much a partnership with the folks at Adidas, was this idea of real-time marketing. So there'd always been tailoring going on through the ad industry over the past years before that. You know, tailoring ads to different demographics, tailoring it to different geographies, tailoring it to different situations. But there wasn't as much of that tailoring and customization to tie, as in what was happening in the real world or on the sports pitch. So what we built together was this hub of content that could be deployed during the World Cup at exactly the right moment. So, you know, if a player did something, took a certain action, scored a goal, or a certain team won when they shouldn't have won, we had the perfect piece of content ready to go and be put out on YouTube in real time, which was so exciting to see that content come to life and do much better than if we just had generic sort of brand ads that went out that didn't really speak to what was happening on the pitch, which I think is really hard during something like an Olympics or a World Cup where there's stuff happening constantly. So that's what blooded me in the sports industry. That's what a lot of my principles were founded on. And that's where I realized there was so much more to be done in the space of sports storytelling. And then went on to work in the partnership side of YouTube, which has evolved. You know, when I started there, we were signing new partners to the platform. So, you know, we were helping partners launch that didn't even have YouTube channels, DAZN, Manchester United, you know, huge entities that weren't on the platform at the time, and encouraging partners to take their first steps into uploading content onto YouTube, which before was kind of seen as, you know, why would I participate in that? Or, you know, what's the use of it? We managed to show the industry that there was real value to it. And that takes us forward to where we are now and to the team that I look after, which is how do we maximize the experience for the sports fans on YouTube? How do we work with broadcasters, rights holders, leagues, clubs, creators, athletes to bring together a really compelling 360 offering of what it means to be a sports fan and what are all the stories out there? And so a lot of my day-to-day involves that. So how do we support those partnerships in the market? How do we push our product teams to develop new and innovative solutions to meet the needs of sports fans? I'll give you an example there. There's a product called Watch With, where now you can have the sort of more traditional production of a sports match with a creator commentating alongside it. And that can happen over and over from different creators. So that's something we picked up on in the region, seeing how sports was being presented with new watch along formats. And we challenged the business to produce and innovate on. And then a lot of cross-functional work as well. So how do we make sure our sales team know what they can take to market with advertisers in the sports space? How do our marketing team know how to tell the story of sports on YouTube? And, there's so many different angles to it. But I think at the core of it, the mission is, how do we build the best digital destination for sports fans to catch up on all the sports they love? And if we ladder everything to that mission, then each week can look very different to the last. But it's very exciting.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you use the term partnerships, which I guess in sports has a few different meanings. So it might be good to just clarify what you mean by partnerships. I think in the context you're using it, it's more about basically educating rights holders, broadcasters, creators on how to basically best leverage the platform and to make sure they're putting up the best possible content on the platform.
Yeah, you're completely right. The partnerships in the traditional sports industry sense, I would suggest, is more around brand partnerships, sponsorships, etc. That's not what we do. We have done that in limited cases, but it's not the core of what we do. It's more about, exactly as you say, taking the time to be with all those different segments of the industry, understand their needs. So are they looking for reach? Are they looking for new audiences? Are they looking to talk to Gen Z in a new, interesting way? Are they looking to upsell people from digital platforms to their O&O or their linear? Are they looking to drive revenue from the platform? And YouTube can serve all these different purposes. But once we understand from each partner what their goals are, we can then help them tailor a plan to help them make the most of the platform through education, through trialing new products, through trialing new content formats, through showcasing case studies of what's worked for similar partners. But at its core, it's about how do we support the industry to make the most of the platform. We're not there producing content. We have tried with things like YouTube Originals, but really we provide the tools, the technology, the platform. We are a distribution platform. It's the role we play in the ecosystem. And we really rely on the partners to upload all the great, creative, emotional, brilliant content that they have to the platform. So that's what partnerships means, is how are we working together to achieve the goals that they have in a way that satisfies what users want, what advertisers want, and what partners want. And if we get that triangle right, we have a thriving platform that's useful for everyone.
Yeah, because I think maybe when you first hear YouTube working with broadcasters, that doesn't necessarily immediately make sense because you think of them potentially as competitors. Whereas actually, I think it's a much more of a collaborative approach where broadcasters can leverage YouTube for further distribution. I'm curious to get your perspective on sort of how you work with broadcasters and how your offerings, I guess, have evolved over time to kind of better serve as that sort of digital destination rather than sort of almost positioning yourself like a Netflix as like a competing broadcaster or platform.
You're on something which is, how do we make sense of YouTube and what's their strategy and what's the line between competition and partner? And I think it's a question we get a lot, and I'm really comfortable in how core broadcasters are to our strategy. It's been a big feature of my tenure in this role, looking after sports and primetime, that we want to go with the grain of the industry. We want to work with the existing broadcast ecosystem because they are so brilliant at what they do, at producing content, at finding audiences, at producing excellent sports stories. And so collaboration with broadcast is at the core of what we do. How we do that is by being the most rewarding third-party distribution platform of any of their other partners. That's the mission that I uphold. So that can be rewarding in the sense of emotionally rewarding. So how do we allow broadcasters to deepen their connection with fans? That could be finding them extra reach through the platform. So, we'll often see that when broadcasters start distributing highlights content on the platform, for example, that their live audiences go up. When they start sharing live streams of alternative feeds of sport, they will actually see their linear broadcast stay strong, and incrementality, and helping them navigate the changes in consumer behavior, which I think we're all responding to. And so guiding them through the disruption. whilst demographics are changing, how they consume sport is a key part. So that's the emotionally rewarding bit. There's creatively rewarding. So I think we want to be the best place where broadcasters can try out new formats, new shows, new documentaries, new episodic series, new podcasts, new forms of live storytelling. It isn't necessarily just about the live feed broadcast of a sports event, but maybe all the stuff that's going on around it and how that can then graduate to the linear. So through YouTube analytics, broadcasters get a really rich sense of what's working and what's not. So that's often something I hear from our partners is what they find enriching is that creative side. And then last but not least is financially rewarding. So what makes YouTube special and unique is we have a platform that gives the majority of our ad revenue that we generate away to the partners. And so we've paid out billions to rights holders over the last few years from all the ad revenue generators. And they can now monetize in more ways than ever, not just through ads, but also through things like Primetime Channels, where they can have subscription revenues. We're introducing every year new ways to monetize, knowing that fans behave differently. So that financially rewarding is really important. We need to make sure that it is financially viable for broadcasters to come onto YouTube. We offer them something called partner sales, which is where they can sell their own inventory alongside their own linear sales, which is a huge revenue driver for them. And then maybe last but not least, that idea of the shop window, that we can be a way to upsell users from the free content they put out on YouTube to their paid service, either through Primetime Channels, which is on YouTube, or sending them off and having them subscribe elsewhere to their O&O service. So the idea of upsell and shop window is really important to our relationship with broadcasters as well.
And in terms of that shop window, the sales pitch there, I guess, is fairly obvious in terms of just the pure amount of users and visibility that YouTube gets versus other maybe more owned and operated or OTT platforms that are saying like, we could stream your stuff for free on our platform, or you could stream it on your own platform, but you're just not going to get found the same way.
I think that's right. I think it's a beautiful funnel. All right, we have billions of users coming into YouTube every single day to watch content they love that have a deep emotional connection. And our premise of our partnership with broadcasters is we can, convert those users into fans of your channels, your brand, your broadcast. Yeah. We can have them consume your content on YouTube and off YouTube. And suppose, creating that rich connection through YouTube as a funnel for free has been really successful. I would call out Sky Sports as a great partner we've worked with on this. I mean, they now treat YouTube almost like one of their distribution channels. So they'll have all their content on their linear service. And then what they can give away, they distribute on YouTube, be it cricket, be it women's sport. Every single week there's something different, be it Formula One, that they'll choose to distribute to grow their brand, grow their connection with the fans. They can also do something very smart, which is take all the people that watch those pieces on YouTube, be it live or VOD, and they can retarget them to make their marketing that they're conducting across the digital landscape much smarter. So they're taking more qualified leads of people they know like Sky Sports content and trying to get them to convert elsewhere. So we've really invested in that area of how do we be a really effective funnel for broadcasters and help them grow their audiences on YouTube and off YouTube.
Yeah, another really interesting broadcast example, I think, is DAZN and how they've leveraged it to build visibility, particularly around women's football and the Women's Champions League. So they're obviously pay-to-view broadcaster, but they've put women's football on YouTube in front of that paywall in order to start building up the audience, which I guess from their perspective, the business model is get more eyeballs on it, really champion this product to the point where there's more people that are interested in then paying for it further down the line. So it's kind of like a short-term sacrifice, I guess, in order to grow a bigger pie in the longer term in terms of interest in that product or that property. I know you also get a lot of the highlights and a lot of visibility for premium rights like the NFL, and we can go on to that later, but particularly amongst that sort of challenger league cohort of kind of like sports that are in that growth phase, do you think like YouTube's a particularly good home for them?
Yeah, I think you're completely right in that that's exactly the genesis of where DAZN, UEFA, the Women's Champions League came from. And I've got so many other examples in mind, but at its core, it's how do you take a product that not enough people know about how brilliant it is, how different it is, how unique it is, and give it a platform to showcase it. And that's what DAZN and UEFA did really, really well with that competition, was a recognition that it was on a journey. And you could say the same about Kings League or Baller League or Live Golf, or you almost choose your sort of new sport that's burgeoning and trying to get aggregate audience. The ones that get it will turn to platforms like YouTube and build their audience first. Really cement with them what it means to be a part of this sport and give it the visibility it deserves. We've talked about what free-to-air distribution is in the modern age. What does free-to-air mean if a lot of Gen Z or a lot of users don't even have a television? What does it mean when, users are using multiple different devices to consume sports content? Well, YouTube reaches over 90% of all different demographic cuts, and it's just a great place to help grow that audience. So I think that's why a lot of these, let's say, burgeoning sports will come to us, because they know we can help with that. And in some ways, it's the story of YouTube overall, not even sports. But if you look at the platform, it's always been about broadcast yourself. It's been about underrepresented communities finding a voice and finding a home on YouTube, whatever their community is, in a way that might not have been possible through traditional broadcast back in the day. And this is just another example of that. And so what we were able to do with the Women's Champions League, I mean, the channel now has over 1 million subscribers, which, had we been sat here 5 years ago having this conversation, there were no women's sports channels with that level of audience. We managed to grow the audience on top of what it was before, when it was on sort of limited free-to-air broadcaster distribution. And then we've seen knock-on effects. So the WSL, the Women's Super League in the UK, is now streamed on YouTube. And we've been able to dramatically grow the audience from what it was on the FA player before to what it is now on YouTube, in partnership with the likes of BBC and Sky. So, I could go on, there's many more examples, but I think the core of what you're getting at is right, it's a fantastic platform for the big sports that want to find new audience, but it's really, really special for sports that are in a development phase and trying to gain an audience is where its magic comes into play.
I think the other interesting thing you brought up there around like what is free to air is how YouTube has evolved from maybe being mobile or laptop centric to also being, because of the rise of smart TVs, in pretty much everyone's living room. And that kind of movement across where like YouTube almost is TV for a lot of people. And I guess that also builds on the product you spoke about earlier with Primetime Channels, where you start to almost have TV channels within YouTube. So you're almost building an ecosystem where YouTube is the TV platform and everything sits with it. Everything can, if they want it to, sit within that platform, and the funnel becomes even smoother than, rather than say, oh, I've watched the Premier League highlights, now let me go find the Sky app on my TV. It's like, oh no, actually you can just click straight through and have your Sky or whatever the channel is directly inside YouTube. Maybe you could just explain that kind of transition, that technological shift, and maybe like consumption shift that's kind of happened over the last maybe 5 or so years.
Yeah, sure. I think you're right. It's fascinating. And the way you describe it is exactly the premise. The idea of bridging and funneling users into the experiences they want to get to without friction is where we see YouTube being really powerful in that funnel model. So YouTube was launched on, we call it living room devices. It's the TV, but the YouTube was launched in the living room because it can also be on games consoles and all sorts of stuff in 2017. So it's really not that long that we've had YouTube as an app on TVs. But in those 8 years, it's grown to now be the majority surface on which users in the US watch YouTube. So when they come home from work or, they put on their TV, YouTube is the app they're switching on and they're consuming the content there, which, I remember the shift that YouTube underwent from being a desktop or a laptop proposition like this to mobile. And so we had to educate users and advertisers that, hey, this thing's now a mobile app. It's not a computer app. And now we've undergone another shift where we're sort of re-educating creators and partners and saying, when you're uploading content, make sure that it's in 4K, make sure that it's episodic, make sure you signal where the episodes are so that users that want to watch on a living room device can watch it in that more lean back way. I think what we're trying to solve for is as you describe, we recognize that there's a lot of friction in the ecosystem, right to very fragmented. There's a great tool that I love to use called Google Trends, where you can go, and this is a public tool available to anyone who's listening. You can go to it and you can get data for how many people are searching for specific terms. And what's interesting in the aggregation space or the fragmentation space is if you look at the phrase what to watch. And you see this huge spike the last few years, or sort of curve, of users trying to find out what they should watch. So the idea of discovery, people are like, what should I be watching at the moment in a world of infinite options? What should I be watching? So that's gone up 5 times. But if you change the phrase and you put where to watch, you know your series or your sport, but you want to know where I can find it, that's gone up 7 times. So that idea that you kind of have an inkling that when you get home, you want to be watching the Nations League on Sunday, but you're not quite sure what channel it's on. Users are really struggling with that. And there's all sorts of other stats around, I think it takes 18 minutes for somebody to decide what they're watching on Netflix, for example, when they turn it on. So all this cumulative time built up trying to decide what to watch and find it is a problem. It's a problem for consumers. It's a problem for broadcasters. It's a problem for rights holders. It's a problem for advertisers. And we think through things like Primetime Channels, we can start to help solve for that, because we can collapse, as you say, that funnel of I'm watching something for free, the trailer of the movie or the show, the press conference, to, the football game that's on that weekend. And then in a couple of clicks, I can find my way to the main event through Primetime Channels, is what we think is really exciting about the technology that we're developing. And Primetime Channels is an early product. It's a nascent product. We've launched it in 3 markets in EMEA with a handful of services, but we're constantly building that out based on this premise that YouTube can be the place that helps users transition between different media experiences. And the living room is obviously the surface where that plays out the most prominently. So yeah, I think that's the real promise of if we can partner effectively with the industry to offer them that opportunity to have their content side by side in one place, then I think it gets really exciting for sports fans to just take out that friction from the ecosystem.
I mean, you're definitely seeing that trend across a lot of rights holders where rights have become incredibly fragmented. They're being sold to 5 or 6 different buyers instead of 1 or 2. And then those packages are all on different platforms, which require different subscriptions, which makes it, I get why rights holders do it, because from a short-term perspective, it's probably how you squeeze the biggest rights fee out of your rights. But in the long run, you are making your fan jump through a lot of hoops to watch every game. So I completely see where the appeal for that would be, from if you're taking it from a fan's perspective. Like, okay, I want to go to one platform, fine. If there's different people that own different parts of the rights, fine, but at least I'm being served it all in one place and I can click in and out on that platform.
Yeah, I think there is a sense of frustration there. I mean, the plus side or the upside is you can now find games in more places. So if you don't have that one subscription, but you do have this, you may be able to find it. I think there is some positive there. To add some complexity to it as well, it's not even as if the same feed is being distributed across multiple platforms. The new thing we're seeing, which I'm personally very excited and interested in, is alternative feeds. So you're seeing rights holders who get it, who are smart, and broadcasters who get it, teaming up with creators and individuals that we have on the platform who have these massive audiences and are sort of the startups of the media ecosystem to distribute different feeds to different sets of fans. And yes, that adds complexity, but actually it makes for a more personalized experience. You go back to that Adidas example, that's where I think things are going, is a much more personalized sports experience. So a couple of case studies there. One is Kazi TV. So Kazi TV, if you don't know, is a creator, was a Twitch streamer, started a YouTube channel, who acquired the rights to stream the 2022 World Cup in Brazil, in his native Brazil. And he put together this fantastic production and show, which was just showing the games in a new way, in a very creator-like way. You think about energy and passion and speaking to the audience in a different way, which was so successful and broke all the records for the biggest live streams we've had on the platform. I mean, if you look at the top 10 of YouTube live streams by concurrent viewership, it's highly populated by Kazi TV. And what was really special was not only was it a new format for the viewers in Brazil to consume, and they loved it, but it was additive to the ecosystem. So what I mean by that is if you look at the numbers and compare Globo's viewership, the local broadcaster, their viewership that they held on games where Kazi TV was present and streaming, and games where Kazi TV was not present, was the same, broadly upheld. So their audience stayed static. It was not cannibalistic or sort of took from one pot to take to the other. But the millions and millions of viewers that Kazi TV brought to his channel increased. And so we're additive on top of that. to what Globo had. So I think it's exciting because it shows there's a new route to growing audience in the ecosystem. It shows that it's not a zero-sum game. And so that's one case study of where this creator traditional media world is combining really well. And by the way, Kazi TV's gone on to commentate the Olympics and various other properties as well since then. The other example, which is recent or maybe less recent by the time this goes out and maybe even a bigger story, is the story of Egg Chasers. So Egg Chasers and Tim Cocker, who was a broadcaster on BT Sport, who then started a YouTube channel called Egg Chasers, which is all about rugby. You know, the creator side of rugby, as we would call it, commentary, analysis, talking about how you should feel about the games that you've watched. And he recently has acquired himself, much like the Kazi TV model, rights to stream the French Pro Division 2 of rugby, which has some huge world-class names in it, like Courtney Laws and Johnny May. And he's now streaming that on his YouTube channel in the UK and Ireland. He says it's the only professional rugby that you can watch for free in the UK and Ireland. He's very passionate about growing the game amongst younger audiences. And again, it's a really nice example where he's growing the audience by giving it a different treatment. And it's not to say that the sort of broadcast treatment is invalid. That is perfectly fine for the majority of audiences, but for different audiences, you need different presentation. And so what he's doing, I think I would advise everyone to go and check out on his channel because it's really special. And these are two case studies that have come about recently, and I predict there's going to be a lot more of these coming.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting to think about where creators sit within this, because I think like the first evolution was creators without permission almost creating their own shoulder content, whether that was just kind of giving their own analysis after the game or doing watch-alongs where they're not showing the feed, but they're just kind of reacting as the game goes on. And like you saw a kind of like trend where people would turn off the commentary and just have like their creator on, right? Whether it's, I don't know, Mark Goldbridge or Arsenal Fan TV, whatever it is, right? Like people started to lean towards that because it maybe resonated more with them than the traditional commentary. And then you've seen that take a step further where the rights holders and broadcasters have started to partner with the creators to create content or shoulder content or create alt streams. And then in the case of that final example, you've got the situation where the creator's now basically acting as a broadcaster and saying, I'm going to buy the rights myself and use YouTube as my distribution platform. And actually, I can do the whole thing, right? So do we almost need to start to recategorize, I guess, creators? Like, it almost needs a broader term now, because it feels like calling them just a content creator doesn't do them justice in terms of their influence and like how they can move the needle for sports.
Yeah, I think you're right. It brings up so many thoughts for me. One is that a lot of these categorizations are artificial, right? They're ones that we create as a sports industry to try and make sense of it. And I'm just as guilty as everyone else, right? It's much more satisfying if we can bucket and understand trends and so on. It's critical, like we have to do it. But then we get frustrated when things blur or they don't make sense or things don't stay in their categories. Clubs behaving like creators behaving like media companies, rights holders becoming broadcasters. It's all evolving. It's all changing. And I think it's tending to blur even the distinction between whether you're a free broadcaster or a paid broadcaster. I mean, DAZN do both. Sky do both. Even that distinction's broken down. So we're just seeing brilliant sports storytellers utilizing multiple formats. And that's not as easy for us to process and understand with those categories. So I think that's my first observation on that. Secondly is these guys are, the startups of the media industry. And I think they deserve a huge amount of respect for what they do. They take a risk on starting channels and telling stories in new ways. I mean, you spoke about the watch-alongs or the early creators such as Arsenal Fan TV. And they've been really successful at aggregating audiences. You used the word resonate. I think that's exactly it. They resonate with younger audiences. They speak in their language. And so they deserve a lot of respect for what it is that they're doing. So a lot of my mission has been to support them and try and find ways to pair them again with that traditional industry and matchmake where we can, because that's where we see the magic happening on YouTube. The most important thing, and I always come back to this when speaking to partners, is there are no gatekeepers or commissioners on YouTube. I don't pick winners. The audience picks winners. And so we have all this vast array of channels. We have 3 million channels in the YouTube Partner Program, which is where you can have a channel and monetize, who are uploading great content and finding communities. And so it's really important to us that anyone can have the same equal billing and chance to succeed in a way that makes it very democratic, I think.
Is there a situation, do you think, further down the line where the idea of exclusivity around rights starts to completely dissipate, and actually the value proposition becomes how you package the rights, and ultimately a bit like music, right? Like you have Spotify and Apple Music have the same product. They both have the music. Whether you use Spotify or Apple Music or a different streaming platform, that's down to your preferences and like the quality of the app and the experience and the discoverability and all of that stuff. Do you think that there's a situation where you start to have that like sort of exclusivity becomes less popular, and then instead, I mean, you're already seeing that, I guess, to a degree, but you have multiple streams, and then, you know, some people might want to watch the rugby with Tim Cocker because they're mad about their rugby and they want to hear what he has to say and hear the stories about, you know, former players that he's played with. And then someone else that doesn't really care about rugby, but I don't know, watched Elena Mayer on TikTok, is interested in rugby for completely different reasons. And they're getting, I don't know, lifestyle stories about like, you know, who this person's girlfriend is or like what his interests are off of the pitch. Like, and you actually just end up with a much more kind of dispersed spread of opportunity where, you know, maybe there's 20 people broadcasting the same game, but in a completely different way.
Yeah, I think you're on something with that theory. And I think it's the trend we're seeing of non-exclusivity and then different storytelling. I'm not sure there is always going to be one feed or one live stream. I think that will become a bit of a fallacy as well. You'll see different treatments of the same property to meet different audience needs because that's what the technology allows now. You know, you have the capability to distribute across multiple platforms, like the conversation we are now having. You know, we'll go in different places. The idea of having it in one place doesn't make sense. So that's always been our attitude at YouTube. You know, we don't do, we don't need to approach things with our partners for exclusivity. We let our products, we let our creators' storytelling win out, and the audience to select ultimately what content they like, rather than feeling like it always has to be in only one place. You talked about the different interest in the game and the fans. I mean, you look at the amount of people that have been brought into the NFL through different avenues, be it being a fan of Taylor Swift and sort of coming out of that angle and starting to wonder what's going on, who the characters are. Or Mark Goldbridge, someone of the preeminent creators in the UK, did a live watch along with some limited footage of the Super Bowl here in the UK, which did really well. And again, it brought in new audiences who maybe wouldn't have watched American football in the UK, but educated them through a lens of, you know, how you'd approach it in this country to get a new audience. And so I think the rights holders and broadcasters that team up well with creators will be the ones that are successful in the future. So yeah, I think completely to your point, we'll see a world where you have more options of how you consume the sport you love that speaks to you in a way that you find most passionate and interesting on the services that you have available. I think that's the natural conclusion.
I mean, obviously your territory is more focused on EMEA than the US, but I'm curious around the NFL deal because I guess that's maybe a little bit different with the Sunday ticket. But I'm curious how YouTube work alongside the NFL to maybe help them better leverage creators. Because I know, for example, that they have a partnership now, and a few other rights holders like the NBA also do something similar, where they'll partner with maybe like an exclusive list of high quality content creators that they trust and give them maybe extra footage or opportunities to use exclusive content on their own channels. How have you found that? I mean, I don't know whether you get to work directly with YouTube. It sounds like maybe you were involved with or get to at least speak with someone like Mark Goldbridge when he's going to do that Super Bowl stream. But like, how do you think about that? And do you see other opportunities to do similar deals?
Yeah. So there's a few things in there. First of all, I think the NFL have done an amazing job on YouTube. If you look back at the history, right, of even the time that I've been at the platform, they've had such a thriving channel where they've really embraced it and taken the advice and used the products and uploaded longer highlights. I mean, they've really invested in the platform. There's a huge difference between YouTube in the US and YouTube in EMEA. That big difference is YouTube TV. You know, we have a product there that is very different that we don't have in EMEA. We don't plan to have in EMEA because we have such a different ecosystem. And it's YouTube TV that enables Sunday Ticket. So, you know, that's not something we're seeking to replicate here. We don't have ambitions to license sports rights or become a broadcaster in that sense. It doesn't make sense for us. But Sunday Ticket works really, really well in the US because that's what the market needed. I think it brought the product to new consumers that couldn't access it before. I mean, let's get down to the real tactical elements of it, that couldn't have a dish on the side of their house, can now log in through YouTube TV or Primetime Channels and watch it. If, say, you're a student in a different state and you want to follow your, the state that you grew up with and the local team, then that's where YouTube became a very obvious solution to. So, so that's on that piece. We're very different in that sense, but the NFL have put together with YouTube something really comprehensive, where if you're a fan of the sport, you can now have a really 360 experience of the highlights, the live, the podcast, the creators. I think the second bit of your question, which touched on how do you open up access for creators, I think is the right one. So we had a partnership last summer with Warner Discovery Eurosport around the Paris Olympics, where we were able to do some really cool things that I think is another trend that I want to push forward as well, which is creator journalism. So this idea that you can have your main event, you can have it all broadcast on linear distribution, but that you give access to creators to go behind the scenes and show the kind of different angles of the sport, either on your own channel as a broadcaster or on their own channels. I'd recommend the latter because that's where they've got the most presence and audience already. And that was really, really successful. And we had a bunch of write-ups on that at the time that showed how it worked. But that was a new way of us treating that event. And we'll be thinking the same for the World Cup next year as well. Is how do we have this extra lens on top of, like, you can watch the highlights. In some countries, you can watch the live of the games, but you can also catch up on all the cultural aspects of what a World Cup or Olympics is. Because the cultural moment, it's not even a sports moment. It's way beyond that. And these creator access deals are really important for making sure that you're showing a different lens to it. And even better, if you can license them some limited content, why not say that they can have up to 10 seconds of rights per game? That would just give it a bit more of an authentic feel without cannibalizing your own audiences. No one's going to consume the highlights package through a creator in that sense. They're complementary products. So a lot of what this conversation is getting at, I think, is the proliferation of new products in the sports market and embracing those and not seeing it so distinctly as like live and highlights rights over here and creator behind the scenes over here. They're blurring a lot more.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. And I guess the sports industry, at least the established sports leagues, make a huge amount of their revenue from media rights. So how do you see that revenue model shifting? Because, there's talk that a lot of younger consumers only watch the highlights, which aren't monetized. If they're giving content to creators to disperse across different channels, that's great in terms of visibility. But how does that convert through to revenue for, if you're Man United or you're the IOC and you own that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's the one on everyone's lips at the moment. A couple of thoughts. Sports at the core of, either in real life or in real time experiences. There's nothing that can match it still. And maybe you could argue that when a TV series drops or there's a sort of primetime TV moment that people gather and they interact around it. But if you look at the top 100 broadcasts in terms of audience, the majority of those are sports moments, right? They're still the thing that aggregates people around the TV or in front of their TV and communicating with other people wherever they might be. So talk of kind of, live sport being on the down or, rights fees collapsing or, even young people not watching 90-minute games, I think is somewhat a bit of a myth. They just watch it in different presentations, as we've talked about, in this chat. So I think that's the first thing. I think some of the kind of doom and gloom is overblown. We're still seeing record-breaking numbers of people tuning in for sports, and that's not going anywhere. And so I firmly believe that's important. I think two more thoughts on monetization and commercialization. So one is experimentation with the model, right? So could we start to see rights holders upend that sort of pyramid of, your live rights is what's, most highly monetized and locked behind a paywall. And then your highlights are the next thing down, which you might be able to license a bit of and make some revenue from on YouTube or other broadcast services. And then you've got this behind the scenes stuff that you give away. What if you flip that? What if the live became the thing that you gave away? Here's the sport and everything behind it. And, if you want to catch up on all the games, here's where you can watch the highlights and they become a bit more premium. And what if then the final leap was, and here's the sort of Drive to Survive experience of really getting to know the athletes. I wonder if that could be a new paradigm of how we experience sport. And so I think that all the models are being shifted at the moment. The only way to solve through them is experimentation, like we're seeing with the case studies that I mentioned. And then finally, when I think about how we approach our conversations with rights holders and broadcasters on monetization, it's just about offering more options than ever. So you can monetize your content for free with ads, and we're introducing more ad pods. We're introducing new AI placed ads that will come, for example, after a goal's been scored and the celebrations die down. That's the moment we sow an ad. So it's good for the brand. It monetizes better. It's good for the user because it's a natural break in the game. So there's lots of sophistication happening in the ad space, dynamic ad insertion and ad podding. How do we increase the monetization without disrupting users? So we're offering more to partners in that sense. Then there's SVOD. So we're able to offer through Primetime Channels subscription revenues to providers that want to host their content behind a paywall on YouTube in a really premium way. If creators want to do that, we have a product called Channel Memberships where they can have a paywall on their YouTube channel. So lots more are using that. And then the last bucket I would describe as sort of transactional revenue. So it could be things like a pay-per-view or sort of microtransactions for individual pieces of video. It could be YouTube shopping. So rights holders and creators turning to YouTube to sell merchandise is really growing on the platform, especially in our APAC markets. We see huge growth in that area. So I think the other thing I'd encourage is rights holders and partners to look at YouTube as a way to make lots of different types of monetization in a way that I don't think other platforms can offer, that each year are really growing to become material for a lot of the conversations we're having with partners, which is something we think about a lot. It has to be financially rewarding for the flywheel to work.
Yeah, 100%. In terms of just finishing off the conversation, you mentioned AI a little bit there. I think that would be a great place for us to finish this conversation. Obviously, Google has come out with a host of announcements around AI with Gemini and Flow and all these different tools. And I know that Neal Mohan, CEO, spoke maybe last year and spoke about 4 pillars. And we spent a lot of time on 2 of those pillars, which are creators as broadcasters or as next gen studios, and then the sort of living room and live subscription part. Maybe we just spend the last minute or two discussing AI a bit more and how that can empower creativity, but also how it can protect the creator economy, which I think was the final pillar that he emphasized.
We almost got through a conversation without mentioning AI. I mean, how magical would that have been? No, I think it's super important. You can't not talk about it. So our philosophy is to be bold and responsible with AI. Bold means, we're constantly shipping new products, updates that have AI at their core. A great recent example would be auto dubbing. So if you're a partner now, you can upload one audio track and then we will dub and translate that into really similar sounding voice patterns, but in different languages. I think we have 9 languages available at the moment. So instantly you can take your video that is English language based, maybe this video, and make sure that it's understood by audiences around the world. I think is an awesome use of the technology. So that's a good example of being bold. Another is we have just launched in the UK and the EU something called the Inspiration tab. So in your Creator Studio, which is where you go to upload videos, we'll give you inspiration for the type of videos you could upload based on what you have uploaded, based on what similar channels are talking about. And so that helps with the content creation process, which I think is where we add most value. Like we see it as boosting creativity, not replacing it. So a lot of the tools we're developing is to arm our creators with that and make things easier, I think. And then there's the responsible part, which is how do we do this in a way that is safe, well understood, not rushed, that it protects creators and their IP really well. And so, we require channels to disclose when they're uploading synthetic content. We make sure that, our policies reflect that creators should be rewarded for their own content that is their own IP and their own usage. So we've long been really proud of how we've approached copyright management, for example. And actually AI underpins Content ID, which is our fingerprinting technology where we can recognize videos and reward rights holders if their content is on the platform. And so, we'll approach this wave of AI and generation in exactly the same way, of being really careful and thoughtful with our policies, whilst also being really excited about what it means for the creator economy.
Yeah, there's a ton of stuff that like potentially comes out of that in terms of whether it's like finding new use cases for archive footage or spinning up like highlight clips that are unique to a certain creator, right? Like let's say, I don't know, someone's a super fan of Ronaldo. Maybe they want to watch the Al Nassr highlights, but they only want the clips of Ronaldo, right? Maybe they don't even want to watch the rest of the game. They just want, what are the 10 clips of that person? Or you get like a lot of videos that, we're in the summer kind of transfer window now for football. And you get a lot of videos around, this player's linked with Man U. here's his highlight reel, and like here's all the skills and tricks that this person does, because maybe he's playing in a foreign league and people haven't seen him play before, right? So there's all these different things where I guess AI will speed up the process, but also allow you to create a ton of new assets, like new content assets that maybe wouldn't have otherwise existed.
Yeah, I think that's bang on, completely right. And in that sense, as I always say, it's never been, or there has never been a better time to be a sports fan.
Yeah, cool. All right, well, we'll end the conversation there before you get kicked out of the meeting room. And I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, really enjoyed it. Great conversation. Thanks for having me, Andy.
Thanks for listening to the Sports Pundit podcast. I'll include more info about the guest and the topics covered in the show notes. And you can also find my LinkedIn profile if you'd like to connect and let me know what you thought. Visit sportspundit.co to find previous editions of the podcast, access the newsletter, and to sign up for our WhatsApp group and see upcoming social events in cities around the world. See you again soon.